Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Hot Mic Podcast. I'm Nathan Ivy, aka Nate the Barbarian, and I am your friendly neighborhood agent provocateur. Hopefully, we can provoke some thoughts this afternoon, get you to thinking. You might even scream at your phone. And as always, I am not alone. Today, I'm joined with Phil Heimlich and T. Nicole Taylor and Kevin Aldridge. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Here we go again.
I'm glad you finally admitted, Nathan, that you are a provocateur. I think that admission was very important.
Oh, it's a declaration. It's
All
not an
right.
admission. It's a
Whatever.
declaration.
Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Most deaf. We need at least one. Right?
We've got more
Somebody's
than
got to
enough
do it.
on this show, believe me.
Somebody's got to do it. So I'll step up and take care of it. So just a little bit of just updates here. We just, our brother Kevin Gordon and his wife are dealing with some medical things. I definitely know the guy. He wants to be with us. And Fridays are kind of aligning with, some of his family responsibilities, which are always first. So I just got the word literally just maybe about 30 minutes ago that he won't be able to join us. I'm sure he would love to, but I just want to give people a heads up because he is on the promo for today. I just didn't have enough time to take it off. So hopefully we'll catch up with him real soon. But the show continues. As always, we must go on. And, we talk about hot topics, and there's been no other hot topic than the tragic plane and helicopter crash that happened over the Potomac. Many people have lost their lives. And, just a moment of silence for all of the people that lost their lives and their family members. Yeah, just want to pay our due respects. That's just a tragedy that, would bring anybody to their knees and something just unexpected. I mean, human error, we still don't know. So there's a lot of conversations about what actually happened. And then, of course, President Trump, newly elected President Trump had a press conference this week in which he blamed a lot of it, or it seemed like all of it, on Joe Biden, Barack Obama, former presidents, both Democrats, and also DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Seems like we're going to see this over and over again, but I have a clip for you. I want to play this clip. And then I want to
even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families?
They
to
are
hear you
a group of
blaming
people
DEI
that have
policies?
lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question.
But are you
I'm
blaming-
surprised coming from you.
Are you blaming-
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
As the president came out here and was casting blame, one thing I noted was that there are still bodies being pulled from the water.
That's CNN's Caitlin Collins. So, people have been criticizing him, and I say rightly so. And, for me, here we go again. Like we saw this during COVID. I have multiple policy and just vibe and what he brings to the table issues with Donald Trump based upon what we saw in a lot of cases during the Trump administration. At the top of the list in terms of examples that I think relate to what we're talking about right now was his handling or his mishandling of COVID. And we see it all on display again, where it's all about him. He's trying to take tragedy and turn it into a partisan and political weapon, and he won't take responsibility. Even though, and a lot of people have been doing some investigating, it looks as if there were some straight up lies and inconsistencies in the things that he said. He started out the press conference talking about some news articles and how this was somehow supposed to prove that the Biden administration was obsessed with diversity, and that led to the tragedy. But then I saw this meme I want to share with you real quick, and I'm thinking, strange that a white guy was flying the plane, a white guy was flying the helicopter, a white guy gutted the FAA last week, but somehow MAGA is blaming too much diversity. What do you think?
Well, I think I should mention there was a pretty good story in the Washington Post that there was a diversity program that he's referring to, but it was introduced by his administration. Okay, I mean, which basically points out that whenever he's talking, it's always a fire hose of lies. And to me, the cruelty of blaming just making it up, just throwing it out there with no evidence to support it is just outright cruel and dangerous. And when you see that, and the sad thing is that perhaps those people are in his base. They listen to Fox or whatever that other news nation that they listen to. My guess is that they had his comments about the so-called diversity reason, but I doubt they are going to report the fact that it was his administration that started it.
Yeah, I think the very fact that we're even having to talk about this is dishonoring the memory of all of those people who died in that tragedy, and is completely, quite frankly, disrespectful and insulting. And I don't mean that as we shouldn't be talking about it, but the fact that we even have to talk about it, I find incredibly disgusting, and, to borrow a word from Hillary Clinton, deplorable. And it's just more of the par for the course from what you see from this president. And this is what people voted for, quite frankly. And I'm not going to stop reminding people who voted for him of that very fact every time he does something exactly like this. This is what you voted for. This is the kind of tasteless, cruel, I think was the word used, and just, quite frankly, someone who doesn't care about anyone but himself. The fact that Donald Trump took this tack was nothing more than to deflect from the fact that even though he's not responsible for this, nobody's really responsible. I mean, it really is kind of a tragic accident until we find out, what the details of the investigation are. But he always feels the need to deflect it off of him because he's the president now, and it happened under his watch. He feels compelled to try to blame Joe Biden, Barack Obama, or anybody else to sort of get any chance that somebody might put this on him because it happened under his 10-day-old administration or whatever it is. He feels compelled to do that. And he is the divider in chief. He is someone who can't see beyond the politics to even give the nation a moment to mourn the loss of the lives of the people in this situation, to immediately politicize it, disrespects every family who was impacted by this. And to me, it's unconscionable. I mean, somebody said it like this: it's not surprising because this is absolutely who he is, but it's still stunning because every time he does things like this, it defies just he talks about common sense. He has none. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. I mean, talk about an oxymoron of all time, someone who has zero common sense wanting to claim that he has it and criticizing other people for not having it. He has no couth. He has no common sense. He has no decency, and he's an embarrassment.
Yeah. Again, my condolences to all the 67 individuals that lost their lives. I had just flown in that same airport, DC-8, like 2 weeks ago. Sure, taking the same pathway because we're coming from the Midwest. And so myself, as someone who already have a lot of anxiety getting on planes, the whole time that I was on there, I'm thinking, like, where's the life preserver? Like, because I see the Potomac River, and it's like really right there. I even did a video of us landing. Thank God. So I for me, it was like it was eerie. I had an eerie feeling, like, goodness, what are the odds, and how can something like this happen? And then to hear this convicted felon president get up on the podium and rant like he did with no empathy. I mean, the most empathy he had was written on paper. So he read that part. But after that, once he started letting loose on his own commentary, in which, the nation is looking for leadership. The nation is looking for security. We know within the first 24 hours, we're not always expecting all the answers. But he even said, we have opinions. And I'm going to give you mine. You don't need your opinions. Like the newscaster said, there's bodies still in that river that they're recovering. Like, how insensitive can you be? And then when you break down the layers, which people are beginning to do, we find out, well, the FAA director, there was none. He resigned on inauguration day, right? And why? Why did he do it? Elon Musk has had this back and forth with him on X. Basically, 2 years ago, Elon Musk had like a failed SpaceX launch where debris came showering down into like the ocean, and he had the director of that at that time had to direct flights to go different pathways so they wouldn't be there wouldn't be an accident there. And so he issued a lot of fines, and then he put a pause on all his launches, continuing on until they have an investigation of the situation. And so that became a vendetta for Elon Musk, and basically told the FAA director, "You need to resign," and he did. And I guess this new leadership, the best and the brightest, didn't think about replacing that right away. So I mean, at the end of the day, the buck stops at Trump. And he doesn't want to take any accountability. He doesn't want to be a leader. He want to blame it on everybody else and everything else that has nothing to do with the situation at hand. And really, it wasn't a time for blame. It's not even a time for blame right now. But since he brought that to the table, he won't stand 10 toes on what the decisions he made and the people he put in front of the American people to lead these important position. Like, I was looking at Pete Hegseth, and when he called him up, it was just like a deer in the headlights. He really had nothing substantive to say. And then and he basically repeated what he said, like, yes, I agree. We need to brighten investing, and we're going to put it into DEI. And then he made a mistake, a huge mistake, in sharing the ranks of the service member who were passed away. And so for 24 hours, you don't supposed to provide the name, you don't supposed to provide the rank or the age. They supposed to give the family time to find out this information. So there's supposed to be no information for at least 24 hours. And on his first, public appearance, he messed up. But this is the best and brightest, right? So to me, it's just really hypocritical. And the only one that seems to be obsessed is Trump. He's obsessed with race, but we knew this. We knew he was a racist. His prejudice is out on full display, and even in a moment that's supposed to be solemn and with empathy and show a real moment to be a leader, he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it.
Yeah, in this case, I think I agree with everything you said. Yeah, my concern is, and a lot of people, and it's just something the nature of social media, but a lot of people, like to pick at me and try to say things like, I love Democrats or I hate Trump. And I'm like, it ain't about emotion. It's about public policy. It's about having people in place that are going to represent the interests of the American people, whether they're Democrats or the Republican. I want competent leadership, period. And I don't think we have that with Donald Trump, and we didn't have that the first time. That's why there was a carousel of people in and out of his administration. Some people who were more qualified than others, once they defied him or challenged him, especially public, they were out the door. And I think that's a real problem. I mean, to me, competent leadership, serious leadership doesn't have a problem with people on their team. In fact, you want people on your team, I would think, that understand the overall, goal, right? What you're trying to accomplish, but they have enough of a voice. You've given them enough agency where they can challenge you, because two heads are better than one.
Well, it's
then
like
three heads are better
Lincoln's,
than one,
didn't Lincoln's
right?
have this
So that way
happen?
you can have
Wasn't
some
Lincoln like a
real
group
back
of
and forth,
well,
and you can really do the best thing possible when you've got somebody that's sort of checking your back. And I don't think we have that in the Trump administration at all. We have a bunch of
That's
sycophants
not what
who will
Trump
do and
wants.
say whatever he wants to do. And to TNT's point, that's exactly what Pete Hegseth said. I thought the same thing. When he took the microphone, he didn't say anything of any substance. And all he ended up doing was saying, hey, the boss is right here, whatever he says we're going to do. I think the American people, Democrat, Republican, or whatever, should be paying attention to yourself and asking yourself, are we safe with these people in charge? But go right ahead.
Yeah, well, the people who support Trump are going to say, of course we're safe, because they're going to believe whatever he says, because they're sycophants, just like the people that Trump wants behind him. Trump's definition of competency is agreeing with what I say, doing what I tell you to do. If you challenge that, then you're
Right.
incompetent and you're fired and you're out of there. Like that is his measure of competency. Anyone who agrees with him. And so again, like I said, don't expect any resistance from people who support him unfaithfully. What you got, or faithfully. What you've got to hope for is that there are enough people who actually voted for him, thinking somehow, inexplicably to me, that you were going to get something different or better from him, and maybe they'll wake up and realize and have some common sense that, oh yeah, this is the guy that we changed our mind on 4 years ago and voted against him and put Joe Biden in, right? I mean, and that maybe that they were wrong in whatever reservations that they might have had about Kamala Harris or whomever, whether that's sexism, racism, or whatever it is, that betting on this guy again was the wrong choice. And you just got to hope that I've said this time and again, Trump is who he is. He's going to expose himself and play his hand and make those people realize that, you know what? Yeah, I might have kind of forgot what a big of an a-hole this guy actually was and how destructive he actually is. And maybe I made a mistake. And in 4 years, if we make it to 4 years, we'll recognize that, you know, his brand of politics is not the way that we need to be going, you know, in the nation. And the sad part about it is we're only like 10 plus days in. You got 3 years and 50 days or whatever it is more, you know, to deal with this garbage. And that's the unfortunate thing for the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you going to say something, Phil?
Just that when you were talking about the need for accountability and the need to have different opinions, I was reminded about Abraham Lincoln, who I think was known for what he called the group of rivals, meaning he actually filled his cabinet with people who had opposed him and ran against him, because he understood. It's actually in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, that there is wisdom in many counselors. But Trump, much like other autocrats, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want accountability. He doesn't want to hear any different opinions. And that is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, very dangerous. And, you know, I got to make this point that the part of diversity that he was attacking as a speech was special needs people. So apparently the federal government, going back to the 70s, have had this initiative to try to recruit people who are special needs and put them in positions where they can be useful, right? And I don't know if anybody has special needs people in their family and or friend or your orbit, but they're human beings too. And in many cases, they are capable of working in particular jobs. It doesn't mean you're going to make somebody an air traffic controller who doesn't have the physical capabilities to do the job. But what it means is if there is a job where we can find you, then we're going to give you the dignity of work. Isn't that what Republicans always say? We're going to provide you with the dignity of work, even as a special needs individual. So he got up there and straight lied to people. I mean, first he said that something about in January, he read an article in the Biden administration, you know, just implemented these rules, which in fact, the article was dated January of last year. Then he starts talking about all these rules. I think somebody brought that up. It might have been you, Phil. And in fact, these were the same rules that were in effect under his Trump administration.
And some of those diversity initiatives were started under his administration.
At least one of them was. And I'm just wondering from MAGA land, like, are they getting this information? Or is it because of the echo chamber, Kevin's saying, no, I think you're right, bro. I don't know if they're getting this information. They're not getting the other side of this. So somewhere out there, you've got millions of Americans who believe what he's saying. They believe that.
Well, here's a guy who's lied over, as best anybody can keep count, over 30,000 times, right? So if you're already in the camp of willing to support somebody who lies like that, then you're not interested in the truth. And that's the reality about people who support Donald Trump, is they're not interested in the truth. It's the point I tried to make, last week on the program is, you can't have an earnest conversation with people who are not interested in facts and in the truth. And when you have a news organization like Fox News that specializes in supporting that, in propping that up, in reinforcing it, and not giving people the full accounting of the story. Yes, you're going to have millions of people who are living on what we call Earth 2 because they're not getting the full picture and they're listening to a guy who lies and who says things without evidence, and people swallow it with whole cloth because they want to. And so this is kind of where we are as a country. I mean, for those of us who believe in truth and facts and check on things, it's not hard to check a bad liar, right? I mean, and which is what Donald Trump is. Like, it's not easy, it's not difficult to go back and search and find these facts and find these policies and things that have been passed if you're interested in the truth. But people who support him are not going to go searching for it because they're only interested in his truth, not the truth.
And the fact of the matter is, even though he told a lot of lies, he told a lot of truths. He really showed who he was, and they knew it. They knew how he felt, about these attacks on diversity, and they were okay with it. They were okay with it. Make no mistake, the whole idea, the great replacement theory, that's something that's just been a quiet rumble going on. And that's why, they're mainly in this full force attack to dismantle anything that looks like the advancement for minorities, and particularly Black people, LGBTQ and different groups, and even women, But the fact of the matter is, there has never been anything specifically that this country has done just for Black folks. We always have to share the benefits. But I'm gonna give you a little bit of stats though for the beneficiaries of DEI, and you could go to the U.S. Department of Labor. The number one beneficiary of DEI, guess who it is? White women, right? Number two, Latinos and Hispanics. Number three, Asians. Number four, Native Americans. Are we anywhere close? No. Number five, people with disabilities. Number six, veterans. I guess we next, right? No. Number seven, LGBTQ plus. And dead last, who get benefits from DEI, are Black folks. But they're so hell bent on getting to us.
Well, if that's the case, why are you guys, I would say, pushing DEI? I mean, you guys have always kind of supported that in a big way.
So good question that you say that, Phil.
It's unfair. I mean, frankly, I don't think Asian Americans have some history of discrimination, the Chinese, whatever that law was, etc. But by and large, I don't think they need any favoritism when it comes to these kind of things. So if Nicole's correct with these statistics, that basically African Americans are getting kind of a raw deal out of it, why do you guys still support those things?
Good question, Phil. And I'll tell you that I know that, like, particularly among, like, when you wonder why you hear like a lot of these Black males, particularly people like Terrace, who we have on here, who will argue against these types of programs, that's exactly it. So when you say, like, why are there some Black people out there who side with Trump on getting rid of DEI, it's for exactly the statistics that T. Nicole put out there, is that there are some Black people who feel like, yeah, why are we fighting for these DEI programs when we don't even benefit from them? So that is a reasonable argument, but that doesn't mean that DEI still is not a good idea. Like, look, we should be for equity and equal opportunity for everybody, regardless of which. It's not about, it really shouldn't be about who necessarily benefits from it. It should be about, is it equal access and opportunity for everybody? And then sort of let the chips fall where they may, to make sure that discrimination is not a part of our workplaces and our institutions, right? We got to remember why we have DEI programs in the first place. DEI programs in the first place were meant to rectify and correct what had been DEI under a different name, which is white supremacy in this country, where these groups were excluded from participation, right? For decades, for years, okay? And so DEI was designed to make sure that that type of discrimination could not exist. It's been misinterpreted as quotas or giving undeserving people opportunities. You know what that is, Phil? And this is the frustrating thing, is that white people use that definition and don't even see how racist that is. It's just another way to say attacks on DEI are just another way to say that minorities are lesser than white folks. That's really all the attacks on DEI pretty much are, is to create this narrative that somehow undeserving minorities are getting opportunities and taking opportunities away from whites, and that whites are superior. I mean, that's the white
I don't get the
supremacist
point about the
argument.
whites are superior. Where that I can see people, white people, let's say, in situations saying, "Hey, I was more qualified than this guy," meaning there wasn't equal opportunity. But I don't see where that kind of person is saying, "Oh, whites are superior." I don't see where that comes out of the.
For sure, well, so what are you basing? So what are you basing the more qualified on? Again, this is where I get into these conversations all the time. Is that at the end of the day, people hire who they want to hire, and this notion of best, most qualified person for the job is always a subjective thing. You guys want to have this conversation and this belief that everything is a meritocracy, that bias plays no part in decisions that are made in hiring. And I'm telling you, that's a bunch of bunk. Because if you've ever done hiring, and I have, when you get down to your last couple finalists, two or three finalists, rarely is it a case where someone is clearly head and shoulders over the rest. Not saying that it doesn't happen, but in most cases, if you got three finalists, you could pick any one of the three and they would do a fine job, more than likely, in doing it. They all have the qualifications. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a finalist. So what is your tiebreaker? It comes down to subjective things, a feeling, who I'm more comfortable with. I mean, all of these sort of intangible things that we use as tiebreakers in hiring decisions that oftentimes, when there's not a huge separator in talent and qualifications, that we use. And so that's why I'm saying that we can't say that our biases or that our personal subjective opinions don't play a role ultimately in the decisions that we make in hiring situations. And that's where I say that this notion of meritocracy or best person for the job is a subjective.
And then it's an automatic advantage being the majority, especially in this country. And so, you think in the respect of the fact that our history and the American story and how that come about, you couple that, and then you have a race of people that's already the majority. So in most situations, I could be the only person in an office. It's not to say that there's, plenty of white people that could do my same job, but what is the hurt and the harm in bringing in more people from diverse backgrounds to be in the position that is also qualified? It's real easy to be overlooked in a society where you are the minority. That's one. Two, what Trump is trying to do, he is trying to hoard the opportunity and legally be able to discriminate. So that's why we see in all these things and these breakdowns of discrimination, is because they want to hoard all the opportunity. And his is very racial and biased and with the superiority complex. I mean, he exudes that. I'm not saying that's everybody's mentality, but for the most part.
Let me ask you guys this. Do you think prior to the Supreme Court decision, which outlawed racial preferences in, I forget, University of Pennsylvania or University of North Carolina, basically said you can't consider race, basically. Would you guys agree that as far as a lot of universities prior to that Supreme Court decision, would you agree that there was preference given to African Americans and perhaps Hispanics and other minorities over white people? Would you agree with that? By universities?
Over?
Yeah.
Over white people?
Are you saying, I'm sorry, go ahead. Like, are you saying that the black people that were chosen weren't qualified? That they were just...
No, I'm not. Well, first of all, you talk about what does it mean to be qualified? I mean, you're talking about.
They still have to fill out an application.
Okay, but what I'm saying is to say, was he qualified for Harvard? I mean, it's not like a yes and no kind of thing. That's subjective right there. Okay, but what I am saying is, I think there was a sense, okay, the reason that Supreme Court decision targeted a specific program, I think the University of North Carolina, or just their overall admissions policies, which were found based on the evidence to favor one race over another. That's why that Supreme Court decision kind of changed all of the admissions policies of most colleges in this country.
Yeah, and I don't know the details.
So Phil,
of
I
it.
think.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go right ahead, bro.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a very complex and deep conversation, and probably more than we can get into in a couple minute take or whatever we're doing on this segment. But I'll try to quickly elaborate on this. First of all, if you look at the gap between college admissions of Blacks or people of color and white folks, there was a significant gap at one point in time.
Oh yeah, one point. What time though? What time?
Well, you're talking about before this.
Yeah, but what
before
I'm
this
saying is, are
Supreme
you
Court
talking back to the
decision,
1950s? Or are you talking about 2 years ago?
No, I'm talking about. So I'm talking about laws that were put in place that allow for colleges to do certain things for admissions to get more minorities in college. Okay, this is what we're talking about.
Laws.
So
I'm
leading
talking
up to
about
that,
I'm talking about college admissions policies, not laws.
That's what I'm talking about. Basically, policies that were put in place that allow for more minorities to get access to colleges. There was a gap there. And when you look at a lot of the admissions standards, particularly as things related to, I don't know what, test scores, things of that nature. So let me ask you this, Phil, do we agree that there is a significant poverty gap that exists between people of color and whites in this country?
I would assume that. I will accept that if you say that's a fact. However, I would just say that a difference in the last, 20 years, whatever, compared to the past is the past in this country tragically was a significant gap between whites and Blacks. I happen to believe today it's more of an economic gap between lower income people and higher income people, regardless of race.
You could say it's more, but it all applies. It's still a factor.
Yeah.
And I like what the individual Sierra Brooks said. Do you take into consideration of the legacy alumni? 40% of white Harvard students are legacy. Now, how do they, why do they get in under those circumstances? It's kind of like an unspoken rule, but that's how many of them got in it. And it's not merit based to just, it's really who you know and
but there's nothing unconstitutional. There's nothing. It is unconstitutional. We'd all agree to choose one race over another. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't give preference to families or parents that previously attended or brother.
But okay, so maybe there's nothing in the Constitution about it, Phil. But what's the difference? What's the difference between giving somebody special preference because their dad or great grandfather went there versus saying, okay, we're going to, because we want to create more diversity on campus, we are going to create policies that not allow you to get in, because you got to remember, there's still standards that these students have to meet to get admission. You're not just getting in because you're Black. You still have to meet certain standards. But what I'm saying is
subjective, though. It isn't just like, oh, this is the score. I mean, it's recommendations, activities. It isn't like there's a clear line. Oh, this person's qualified, this person isn't. It's a subjective thing.
No, I think it's a little bit more than that. No, I think there's some concrete sort of, if you won't just say requirements, you can say
maybe there's a minimum they have for SATs and stuff. I'll buy that.
Common qualities among Harvard students. So yeah, there is a line that they can look at to try to predict whether they think this person is going to be quote unquote material for that particular college. And to Kevin's point, they're not taking people with GEDs, right? Who wouldn't have qualified to get.
No, I'm not suggesting.
That's not what we're talking about.
Let me throw out another example. See what you think about this.
But before you do, can I address something you said?
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And I'd like to finish my point. I started.
Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead, bro.
Gentlemen, I apologize. Ladies,
go right ahead.
I apologize.
Okay, so Phil, you talked about the income gap, and this is sort of where I was
disappearing
going.
middle class. What's happening?
That with the poverty gap that exists with minority students, what I would say is is that if you want to look at academic standards, and this is one of the things that never gets taken into consideration, I think, by people who have a issue with these admissions things. And I've talked to a lot of admissions folks at universities around the country. If you take a look at a child, let's just say you have a Black child who is raised in a very poor environment and goes to perhaps, let's just say, a school that is not the best. But this is a student who is overcoming severe economic and environmental issues that allows them to achieve a certain GPA. That GPA proportionally might be equal to or better than a student that comes from a more affluent background who doesn't face those challenges and who goes to a much better school. So
but
in
it's
other
poverty,
words,
not race.
a student in a suburb. Wait, let me finish, Phil. A student who is raised in an affluent family in a nice suburban, highly rated school district who has a high GPA may even be equal to or equivalent to a student who has a lesser GPA, but who has had to overcome more obstacles to achieve that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense as a issue of poverty for sure, but not race. And I'll give you an example. I mean,
well, it does if proportionally the majority of the students that you're trying to admit who are not getting access to these universities are Black. It does make a difference.
This? I have prior to that Supreme Court decision, if you had a doctor who was Black, okay, and had this kids applying to college who were also Black, there's no question that they receive, or a high income person, whatever you want, there's no question that those colleges, particularly elite colleges, were giving a preference there because they wanted to have more Black students. So in other words, I can justify giving an extra edge to someone who is poor, regardless of race, because those are the obstacles. But someone who's African American, their father's a doctor or a lawyer or whatever the heck, they haven't had much to overcome. I don't see why they should get a preference, which they were getting.
DEI, diversity is the welcoming of all people, and there's nothing negative about that. Equity is providing the level playing field so that we all have the access. So whether you're someone with a disability or, whatever the case may be, it should be accommodating for it to be a fair access to the same thing as anybody else. And inclusion is providing the economic opportunity for underrepresented minority groups. And so with those pillars of what DEI means, that is like a positive. It's not a negative. And even if in the overall African Americans don't benefit the most, we do benefit. We need those programs and things to give us advantage when you're at a disadvantage, whether it's social economics or whether it's the environment that you come from. Everyone isn't granted those same opportunities, and so it's just leveling the playing field, and especially people that come from a background like ourselves where you never given reparations. Some of these other groups, Native Americans, Japanese Americans, Jewish Americans, all when the country have put into law or done things, adverse against them, the government has made them whole in some way or form or fashion.
What are you talking about there? No, what do you mean made whole? With Jews or
Italians
or whatever? How are they made whole?
Reconciled by reparations, by reconciling the wrong that they did. The Japanese internment camps, our tax dollars paid for the individuals that suffered from that. Native Americans, they received treaties, land, and everything else. Jewish Americans, Germany issued out payments, and then even in the Obama administration, Obama issued out reparations to the descendants of Jewish Americans. And so at the end,
I never got any, but continue.
Those were the ones that fell low below poverty. You can look it up. You can Google it.
All right. Okay.
But I'm just saying, people have been receiving advantages, and we're the only group of people where the boot continues to be put on our neck, and people are still telling us pick yourself up by the bootstraps and do what you're doing. And even despite all that, we overcome it all. You know, the odds are against us, and we still push through. We are still here. You know what I mean? But take into account diversity. I heard this on the Breakfast Club, but someone was saying something that was very important. I hope I can remember it. But some of the United States is one of the diverse countries in the world, right? And there's the most diverse states in the United States is what? California and New York. And the most diverse place in the South, or the portion of the South that makes the most money, is what? Atlanta. And you can fit all the states that surround Atlanta, and they don't have the economy that the city of Atlanta makes. Alabama, Mississippi can't even compare, combined, can't match the economy of this one diverse city in Georgia. And so diversity works. It makes corporations better. And so the attack on DEI and diversity is really just
I think the attack. I think, Nicole, the attack is on racial preferences.
You're afraid of the competition.
I'll wait till you finish.
So Phil, let me say something. Let me ask you this question, Phil.
Let me say something.
Let me ask you this question, Phil. Since you don't like DEI, let me ask you this question because you're a fair guy.
Here's the thing.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Let me ask you this. So let me ask you this. You don't like racial preferences,
I do not.
Phil.
And let me just follow up.
Let's just say that. So wait a minute, Phil. Wait a minute. You don't like racial preferences. So let me ask you this.
Or gender preferences.
Okay, so for gender preferences. So let me ask you this then. So if you don't like racial or gender preferences, then tell me, how do you feel about the first several hundred years of this country where it was all racial and gender preferences for white males? And how do you reconcile correction for that? So is it just that those who were excluded, so those who were excluded from the process, excluded from accumulating wealth, excluded from accumulating generational property and those sorts of things, what would be your correction to make it right? Or should those people who suffered, who were not included, should they just suck it up and start from scratch today?
Well, I'll answer that. Let me clarify one point of just fact. The Supreme Court decision was specifically about racial preferences. Okay. Now, I think there was a majority view, but the minority on the Supreme Court didn't say they weren't racial preferences. There was no question they were. And the question is, the people, when I say minority, I don't mean racial. The minority of the Supreme Court said we should still keep racial preferences like the ones that's college, and the majority said no, we shouldn't. Okay, so the issue of whether there are racial preferences, at least in that situation, that's a fact. There were. And the thing is, I noticed when we get into these discussions, you, and I don't necessarily mean all of you, but some of you define DEI one way, and I and others define it another. But maybe I should say that if you say DEI is just equal opportunity, which I think this is what Nicole or somebody said, if it's just equal opportunity, I'm okay. Fine. I'm pro DEI then. But if it includes racial preferences, I'm not okay with that. So it's not that I'm anti DEI in terms of opening up the pool. So I just want to be clear on that. And now, as far as what you said, Kevin, let's put it this way: anybody who has any knowledge of this country should be just sickened by what this country has done to minorities through that history. I mean, again, I'm not saying that my heritage had it. Well, we did in Europe, okay, but I'm not saying we had it so tough here. Though, just to give you an idea, I remember my father telling me that.
Phil, real quick, you didn't answer his question though.
Yeah, I'm going to get to it. But all right, I'll answer his question. My first point is I totally agree with you on the history. Okay, against not just blacks, but other groups as well, Hispanics, Asians, women, etc. My belief would be what I understood Martin Luther King to say, and if I misunderstood this, then you correct me, that he said he wanted his children to basically have the same opportunity as some white guy. He talked about equal opportunity. I don't recall him ever saying we need to start giving preferences to our people, okay, over white
Trying
people.
to
And
use his words.
I don't
Bill,
recall him ever
you're
saying
still
that.
not answering. You're still not answering
He
my
also said,
question.
The
And
answer
we
is I
can,
don't. The
if we
answer is
wanted to, we can.
I don't
I can
believe.
give you a
I know the
dissertation on what I can give you a dissertation on what Dr. Martin Luther King need to say happened. What you and a lot of other, frankly, no other way to say it, white people like to do is you like to focus on the tail ends of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and you don't like to focus
Let
on
me
a
answer
lot
your
of the
question
things that he said
directly. I'll answer it directly.
at the beginning of that. So my question is how do you make right decades, centuries of racial exclusion? How do you make that right?
I believe,
and I'm not even talking
gonna
about
answer you
anybody else. I'm gonna talk about black people. I'm gonna make it specific to black people who were slaves, who were discriminated against in this country. How do you make that right? Because there are a whole lot of people, and I'm not saying this is you, Phil. I'm saying people who look like you, who benefited from the exclusion, the non-participation of us in the economy, in the society, who directly benefited from that. So are you going to sit here and tell me that you don't think this country owes an obligation or owed an obligation to make that right in any way, shape, or form?
I guess the answer is I don't put it this way. I believe the right answer is true equal opportunity. Okay, not preferences, even notwithstanding the terrible legacy. Okay, in this country,
and that's the problem in this country, right there. What you just said, Phil. Right
we
there,
can have
what you
equal
just said.
opportunity when we
I
get our
believe the answer
reparations.
was
And then
equality,
That's the
not
problem. You
preferences.
don't think Phil. So let me ask you this.
You guys are really putting me on the
This
spot
is even
today.
illegal.
Ahead,
This is even a legal thing. This would even be a legal thing. If you and I were doing business, Phil, and I cheated you out of thousands to millions of dollars, and you took me to court for work you did, for things that you should have been able to get, but I denied those things to you as a prosecutor in a court of law, Phil. If you took me to court and sued for reparations or restoration of things that were denied to you, and you prove that to be the case, do you think the judge would make you whole?
Yes, he would make me whole. You're correct in that situation.
So there you go, Phil. So
yes.
legally, as a legal professional, you're going to sit here and say that you don't think black people in this country are owed anything? Get out of here, Phil. Get out of here,
Here's the next
Phil.
question.
Come on, man. That's ridiculous.
Here's the next point. Here's the next question. Let's assume you're correct that, yes, there was a need to change the balance or to let's just assume that. I'll make that assumption. Okay. The question is then, how long do you extend those preferences? I gave you the example where, okay, in the 90s.
I would prefer reparations.
Let me finish. Can you let me finish? I gave you an example on another podcast about the consent decree that started in the 1980s. Okay, 40 years later, okay, they were still giving racial preferences on an objective test. Now, at some point, you got to say, okay, we've made this progress. Now we're not going to favor one over the other. Let me give you one example, then I'll be quiet.
Well, you know what that point is? That point is when you see the numbers and you start to see real representation, right? Within, I guess, the ranks of the police department. And until then, you keep those policies
I don't think there's any issue. I don't know. I haven't looked at the stats, but I'll tell you this, as far as university.
I just answered your question though, Phil. So Phil, here's what I hear you saying. It's almost like, let's say you've got a track meet, right? You got two individuals. Here's what I hear Phil Heimlich saying, and tell me if I'm wrong. You got two individuals and it's a track meet. Mm-hmm. And just before the start of the gun, one individual takes a chain and a metal ball and they chain it to, we'll say, runner A, right? So then they take off and runner B gets 200 yards ahead of runner A. And then runner B says, you know what? That was wrong. I should never have changed.
So what's the solution?
Let me finish.
Okay.
And then runner A, after getting 200 yards ahead, looks back at runner B, who runner A chained with a metal ball. So runner B can't take off. And runner A says, you know what? We found God. We was wrong. We was wrong what I did to runner A. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to unchain you and then start the clock. You're not going to move runner A up. You're just going to start right there, right?
And not only that,
Well,
we're
the
gonna
truth is, if that was actually happening,
that's exactly what happened.
So it can all be watered down and diluted, and then the people
what Phil is saying is
trying to assist and help.
I mean, the way I would look at
what
that
Phil is
example
saying
is the
is
answer's in the next race. There's no change. That's the
what
answer.
Phil is, but it's only one race, right? It's called one lifetime. So what Phil is saying is that in this example, once I found God and realized I did you wrong, we can just take off right there. Sure, I'm 200 yards ahead, but it's equitable. No, you've got to do. If you knew you were wrong,
let me try an example.
Or you got to bring runner A up. That's where it is, and we're not.
Let me try an real life
equity.
example.
Here's what Phil is not going to acknowledge. And like I said, if we took this,
equity is not equal
to court. If we took this to court, Phil knows he's arguing a losing case right now. Because if we took this to court and Black people were to get pain and suffering, damages for the years in which they pursued unequal treatment, the jury resolution would be incalculable. So what Phil wants to say is, for how long should we do it? Well, I would say what would be fair is for equally as long as it was done to us. So at a minimum, so as long as I was discriminated against and allowed not to participate, I would think fairness would be that I should get preferences or examples for as long as I was denied them. That is what would be fair and equitable. You kept me out of the game for this long, I get to stay in the game this much long for you to rectify it to make it equal. Because here's the reality, is that we will never be able to calculate really what the loss has been to Black people in this country as a result of slavery and Jim Crow. It's almost incalculable to go back and say, to try to put a dollar figure on it, to try to put a health impact on it, to put a learning impact on it.
You can't do it.
It's almost impossible to calculate. So therefore, having said that, if you want to ask me to answer to that question for how long, however long you held us down, that's how long you need to make good on.
I would say twice.
And that to me,
twice.
Let me try to. Can I ask for an example?
Years, and let's say you got the Cincinnati Police Department. If we do some investigations and find out that they had a whites-only policy, which, by the way, Phil, that's a racial quota. The quota was 100% white.
Oh, no question. It is a racial quota.
So
racial preference. No
I'm
question.
a little different. I'm
No
what people
question.
might say a little bit. I'm a little bit different. I have no problems with the concept of racial quotas because for decades, if not hundreds of years, in many of these institutions, you had racial whites-only quotas. And the only way, in my opinion, to deal with that, it would be quotas. So I would take it a step further. Just kind of using the example of the human body, right? And again, this is by no means scientific, but just naturally speaking, we all know that it takes twice as long to lose weight that you burnt off. And I think it's probably the same way when it comes to, dealing with equitable treatment and fairness and racial discrimination. So if we found out that the Cincinnati Police Department had a whites-only policy for, let's say, 80 years, which could be true, then it should be at least 160 years in which we put DEI and other measures in place to try to combat it. I know I'm in a minority in that, but that's just how I would look at it.
Well, let me throw out one example. Can I throw out one example? You guys have talked. Let me throw out one example.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
There was a prominent private school in New York City. I think it was maybe Horace Mann or some prominent school. And it was the admission was strictly based on a test. I guess like Walnut Hills, if it still does that, strictly based on the test. Okay. There was because of the concern about having not enough minorities. I don't know if it's what minorities, but presumably African American, others. They got rid of the objective test. Okay. And the result, by I guess focusing more on getting more African Americans or others, is what happened is that the Asian Americans, filed a lawsuit against that because they were severely hurt by that because they did very well on that objective test. And by getting rid of that objective test, basically you remove the equal opportunity that existed before. Now, you guys, what do you guys think about that?
The fact of the matter is, it's always going to be someone that does well, and it doesn't even should be just the defining factor by race. It's always you can submit for something, and it could always be someone at equal. And if you had the choice between this A, B, and C,
But this
you
is
know
not
what
the
I mean?
case. This is a test. It's an objective test. It's the top people.
I mean,
in-
So
we don't
here's
even
what I
have
would
all, you
argue.
don't
Here's
even
what
have
I
all
would
the
argue
practice
with
to
Phil
even
is
say.
Phil argues about objective tests. Objective according to who? Like I always say,
Everybody
anytime
takes the
you come
same
up with these
test. That's
tests,
what it is.
that's your definition of objective. But I think there have been studies that have been done over some of these testings over the years that have talked about how some tests are very culturally biased, and while you consider them objective, they're not objective, and you'll shake your head at it. Here's the disingenuousness that I got to call Phil out on, and others like Phil who argue against this. And this is how I know it to be true: is that if the situations were reversed, Phil would never accept what he is suggesting that Black people in this country accept. And you know why I know that's true? Because look at how hard he's arguing against racial preferences. Look at how hard and vehemently he's arguing against the idea of racial preferences because he sees it as unfair. So if you were to flip it and he was actually the subject of institutionalized unfairness, he and other white people absolutely would not stand for it. And in fact, we would see more January 6th type uprisings in this country, like what we saw, even when white folks felt that the election was stolen from them. So this is why I say, and I say, you know, white people get upset with me, but I just believe
I'm
in
not
speaking
upset
truth
with you.
based
I'm not
on what I
upset.
see and what they give me. That they would never stand for what Phil is suggesting here. And that is the hypocrisy, the disingenuousness, Phil, and why you will, quite frankly, never win this argument with me or anybody who looks like me, because we can see the BS. And you know it's BS, but you will never
That's
acknowledge
not fair
it
to
'cause you
say I
wouldn't
know it's
stand.
BS. That's not fair to say.
But
Not
that's
fair.
what his platform is.
But
I
answer me
can
that
disagree,
question,
but
Phil.
you don't have to say that, oh,
If
Phil's
the
got BS.
situations
That's
were
not fair.
switched, if the situations were switched, Phil, and you said, and you were historically done wrong, you personally were historically done wrong, and I said, you know what, Phil, all those years that we screwed over you, we're not going to do that anymore, and we're not going to make it right. But you just need to get over it and move
Well,
forward.
so you're talking about the same person as if there's not successive generations. Let me throw out one more little example, which has happened, which in my life, okay, or involving my whatever you want to call it, parents. When my father was applying to medical school, he told me that there was this is like late 30s or something or whatever. There was believe it or not, there was a very strict quota that they would only allow a certain number of Jews in that class. And even though he got into Cornell, but his point he made was all of these schools, they had this strict quota, which clearly was discriminatory. There's no question about it. Now, I know that impacted him, but I don't think he would ever say, okay, I want Jews to have preference for the next 10 years or 20 years. So to say that, oh, I'm all BS and I know better, no. I think that's a relevant example. I'm not saying the treatment of Jews in this country was anywhere near how blacks have been treated, but nonetheless, I think the principle stands.
At the same time,
Look, Jews still have white skin, or most of them. The way that we see Jews in this country, they still have white skin. And the reality of it is that most Jews, as we consider them white Jews, I realize that there are Jews that are of many colors and many different backgrounds.
I'd agree they're
these
mostly
days.
white.
I'm talking about the Jews you're talking about. They still have white skin. And they are not subject. A Jew in this country can change their name.
I'm going back to the 30s.
And they can still
I'm going back to the past.
They can still look white, and they're still gonna get preferences in this country that black people are not going to get.
Yeah, like TNT.
I think that the preferences is selective. Like, you know, people take issue if it's, you know, black people getting any preferences or LGBTQ community getting preferences. But you feel the same way about veterans? Because I swear when I look at applications,
that's not based on race. That's based on service. That's ridiculous.
I know, but there's clearly a preference. Like in almost everything you do, like they ask, "Are you a veteran?"
You're giving a preference to people who fought for our country.
But I'm just saying, but then you just said everything should be equal.
I didn't say everything. I said from
No,
as
you said
racial.
you
I
would
said
prefer
no
everything
racial
be
preferences.
equal.
I did not
But
say
this is
everything
selective
equal.
preferences.
So any other preferences, any other preference other than race is okay
No,
in your
I
mind.
don't believe in gender
So
preferences. I don't believe in religious preferences where they discriminate against whether it's Jews or whatever group, Muslims, whatever.
In our
I don't believe in
Constitution,
any
I
of
mean,
those.
that's
I don't
different.
believe in
That's
those
different.
either. It's not just race.
So you believe. So let me sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying you believe in service preferences, like for military and people,
No,
but you don't
no.
believe
What do you mean surface? That's what do you mean? That's not
service,
surface.
service,
Race is more
service,
surface.
service.
Where do you
service,
get the word surface?
service,
No,
Phil,
service,
service.
Oh, excuse me.
service,
I'm
Yeah, yeah,
like
sorry.
yeah. I'm
protecting
reiterating what you
service.
said,
In
right?
that
Correct.
case, I do. Yes, I think
Okay.
that's
I just don't
legitimate.
understand how you square that
I'm sorry.
against preferences for what you admit were decades, if not hundreds of years or 100 years of racial segregation and discrimination and redlining.
That
If
comparison
anything,
doesn't fly.
but I don't understand how do you square that?
I'll
So
tell you how.
you admit
I'll
this
tell you how I
country
square
did
it.
something wrong for a long time to a whole lot of black
Well,
people,
it wasn't
but
that
you don't want
anything.
to remedy that with preferences. But if I
It
served in the military, that trumps that.
Yeah,
That doesn't.
it
How does that
does.
make
I'll
any
tell you
sense?
why. Because military service, nobody was. It wasn't that these veterans were oppressed and prejudiced and discriminated, so we have to make up for it. That isn't the basis for that. It's basically the fact that they served our country, so we're giving them a reward, not making up something, but giving them a reward for having served our country.
So you don't believe in paying your bills.
So you don't think the descendants of slaves and the slaves themselves deserved a reward for their service to this
Their
country, their unpaid
their blood,
service
sweat, and
to this
tears.
country?
Look here.
I mean, I
I,
put it
Yeah.
this way. I mean, we're
See,
getting.
you see it differently,
I,
Phil. You see it differently, Phil, because you're not
I know,
affected by it. And this is the main problem that I have is that it's easy to try to deflect and say, oh, I don't see it the same as. So what you're saying is that somebody who voluntarily serves this country is more deserving of reward and restitution than somebody who
built
was
this country,
involuntarily forced against their will to serve
baby.
and quite frankly build this country without wages. Hey, at least when you in the military, they still pay you wages. You still
Housing,
get
education.
college education. You got the
Got it.
GI Bill. You got all of this other stuff that you get for voluntary service. So you mean to tell me, and this is no diss on, I got much respect for everybody who's in our military, and I think they should get all of those preferences and more. I do believe
They
that.
are DEI.
But you're not going to sit here and tell me that they are more deserving than those folks who were involuntarily. And when it came time to fight for this country, they fought for this country even when they didn't have rights.
I agree. That
So
is
you're
true.
not going
The
to sit here and
GI
tell
Bill
me
denied,
that you think
denied,
those
agree with that.
preferences for
You want to update
veterans,
your thoughts?
you think those preferences for veterans are
You
more
want to update your
deserving?
thoughts, Phil?
Come on, man. I argue with you. You got the law background,
Yeah.
Phil, but you and me can go in the court of law right now, and I'll argue that case against you every day, and I bet you lose.
You want to update your thoughts on that, Phil?
We can take it to a jury. I bet you
Hey, Phil, do you want
lose.
to update your thoughts on that? Because clearly that's not consistent, bro. Like that mindset that you did, it makes no sense whatsoever.
No. Let me put it this way. I don't see veterans benefits equivalent to whatever you want to call it, reparations or
DEI.
preference, whatever. I see you're talking about two different things. But
Huh.
I will say
I thought we were
this.
talking about who deserves to get preferences.
Yeah, okay.
Oh.
I'm kind of. I've already told you whether you guys
Equality
agree.
versus equity.
Whether you agree.
Let me bring something else up. It's along the same conversation, but I want to bring this up. The Ohio AG, that's Attorney General David Yost, is putting pressure on Costco. I plan on spending money with Costco this weekend. They are getting my
Yeah.
money because I respect the stance that they're taking with DEI. So just to give you some backstory real quick from what I read, and crew members or whoever set me straight if I'm wrong on this, but from what I understand, there was a shareholder, a prominent shareholder that issued some information with the other shareholders with Costco about how it might be in their best interest, their best business interest to do away with their DEI program. They voted on it, the shareholders. The shareholders decided that they want to stick with the DEI initiatives with Costco because they feel like that's how they can better run their business and serve their customers. But now you got Republicans. I believe there's like around 17 Republican attorney generals who are now sort of flexing some kind of legal, actions or ramifications on Costco and other businesses if they don't abandon their DEI policies. And I'm thinking to myself, I see what this is. It's like a fishing expedition on one hand. They want to see if there's any plaintiffs out there that they can, have a lawsuit against Costco and they can make it a big thing. But I'm like, wait a minute. I thought Republicans believed in the free market. I
Mhm,
thought they believed in staying out of people's business and
mhm.
out of their bedroom. We know that's a lie. But here we go again. Isn't this just government meddling in a private business affairs? That's my take on it. But what is your thought?
Mine?
Or anybody? Yeah, Phil, we'll
Okay.
start with you. Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, we've talked about, and I think we've agreed that DEI can mean different things. Okay. I don't mean, it means one thing can be called DEI, and it may well be, and there's other types. Okay. When you're talking about we're going to specifically discriminate or use racial preferences. That's one thing which I don't support. Okay. But I believe in this Costco case that it was not that type of DU. It was not that type. It was basically expanding the pool and making efforts to open it up or recruit wherever you want minorities, which I don't have a problem with. Okay. The reason I believe that about this case and the other ones that they're going after is because once that Supreme Court decision said racial preferences are unconstitutional, I'll guarantee you that most companies around this country, if they were, or universities were engaging in racial preferences, they dropped them. I'll guarantee it. Now, therefore, what Costco is doing, which I have no problem with, okay, is they are basically recruiting minorities or expanding the pool. That's why I agree with you, maybe for different reasons. It is no business of Dave Yost or any of these guys to say you can't do that. And the only reason they are doing it is because he's running for governor. He sees, I'm anti-DEI. I went against DEI. For him or any of these guys to threaten businesses that are not engaging, that have a DEI program, but not racial preferences, I agree, that is none of their business. And I agree with you. As a Republican, I should feel stay out of my business as long as I'm not violating the Constitution.
Here's what I love about this conversation about preferences, and this goes back to sort of what I was saying about hiring practices, is when you get right down to it at the end, your decision is your preference. I'm going with who I prefer to work with and who I choose or who I prefer to employ. So if as a business, I decide that diversity is good for my business, having different people who come from different perspectives, who look different culturally, if that's going to bring in customers and different types of people to my business, and I get down to the last 2 or 3 finalists for this position, and one of them happens to be a Black guy, and I say, you know what, it's going to benefit me. He's going to do a great job, and it's going to benefit my business to have a Black person here because diversity is good. That's who I'm going to hire. That's what DEI is. It is a recognition. You call it racial preference or whatever it is. It's a recognition. It's a recognition that equal opportunity is good, casting a wider net is good, and the diversity is good for business. All of those 3 things are proven. So if I get an opportunity to pick out of a pool of candidates that I have and they can do the job, if diversity is good for business, I'm going with diversity. And that to me is if that's part of a winning business strategy for a business.
What if on the other hand, what if it's an area that's a area where people don't want to have women or Blacks in those positions? You'd say if that person, those 2 finalists, and they choose the white guy because it's going to be better for our customers, you're okay with that?
They most often do. They just don't have a program. They just don't call it a program. It's called
the lack of diversity is intentional, and seeking diversity has to be intentional. It has to be intentional just to even out the playing field, because for all these years and for all these centuries, the majority has intentionally taken care of themselves. And so at this point, and where we are in the game, people have to really be intentional in diversifying their staff, or the way they do, the way they work, and everything else. And so it has to be intentional. We know that everyone from every race have implicit bias. You may not even feel, like I'm not I could be biased toward another group of people just for whatever reason. And because of these things, we have to check our biases in and be intentional in wanting to share spaces, share opportunity with more than just people that look like ourselves, especially if you're in a majority position that has, benefited and have, been able to reap the opportunities more than anyone else. I mean, it's the only fair thing to do. And we're talking about fairness, equity versus equality. It's fairness and being able to level out the playing field so more people can have the opportunity to the American dream. That's what it's supposed to be about. And no one, and we don't understand, or I don't understand why that's so hard to comprehend. And then in other respects, when it comes to other groups, having preferences, it's okay. I'm okay with veterans having I agree with you as well. They give their lives. I have a lot of family members who have served this country and are veterans, you know what I mean? And they should reap the benefits that they get. When my brother has on his, Army fatigues, people offer to pump his gas. Thank you for his service. But if he's wearing his regular, gear, get hood gear or whatever you want to call it, he can easily be roughed up by the cops. You know what I'm saying? They don't know that he served this country. And so it's just like those complexities, like people and their judgments and how they, look at certain ones. You have to take that into account. It's a different life experience in America for someone that looks like me.
Yeah, part of what I think it is, Nicole, is I think like Phil, again, I think Phil is a good guy. I think he's a smart guy, a well-intentioned,
just stop right there.
well-hearted individual. But here's the challenge with that is that Phil struggles to imagine that there are a lot of other white people who don't think like him, who don't share those points of view, who don't share that sense of enlightenment and fairness. And so they just assume. I think white folks assume as they walk through most of society, and they really believe in this idea of fairness and equality because pretty much for them, that's mostly their experience. They don't have to experience the disproportionate inequality and disrespect that minorities and even women including women and minorities, but they're not subjected to that. That's not their reality. So when you challenge them with something that's counter to what their everyday experience is, they have a hard time accepting it, and they have a hard time believing that other people don't think like them. And those of us who are on the other side of it recognize that that's not true. So when we're sitting here telling Phil these things, he's running it through the filter of who he is and what he believes and perhaps what he's experienced, not giving proper credence to or notion to the idea that, Phil, you might very well be in the minority of the majority, and
I consider that a compliment,
you may even not be aware.
Yeah,
and that you may not even be.
I don't get that many compliments in this podcast,
the,
so I grab for anyone I can get.
Yeah, I mean, and I think T. Nicole hit on it. You got to be intentional with diversity, and here's why I say that. And I've said this many times on this podcast. If you work in corporate America and you look around your office where you are, and you only see one or two Black people there. And I challenge all my white friends and people who are listening to this. If in your workspace, there's less than a handful of Black people that work there, I want you to seriously ask yourself, why is that? Why is that the case? Most don't even think about it because I've asked a lot of my white colleagues this very question. And I get it. They don't even think about it because they're focused on their reality. So it doesn't even register with them. And it's not outside of the norm for them to work in places where there are very few minorities there, but they never ask themselves the question, why? Is it that minority people just aren't interested in the field that you're interested in? Or do you really believe that there are, but all of them who apply are less qualified than you or the people who work around you? Like, you never bother to really sit there and ask yourself, like, why is it so unequally fair or diverse in my workplace? Why? Just ask yourself that question. And so where you either have to land on is that Either there are a few places. A lot of black people just aren't applying for the jobs where I work. Okay, well, that leads to a second question. Why not? Okay, so either they're not applying or they are applying and they're just not good enough, right?
I would say they
Or
don't even get to the second question in most cases.
yeah, or there's a very good chance that there might be an issue with bias
But white
in
people don't see it that
my
way.
work.
If
Yeah, you're right,
I-
man. Spot on. Well, white people don't see it that way. Like when white people, and this is just my opinion, but when white people, let's say, go into a cafeteria and people have written about this, and they see all the white kids over here and all the black kids over here, they'll ask themselves, why are all the black kids sitting together? They don't even see the other side because it's just their reality, right? They're totally blind to it. They don't even see, wait a minute, we're in the majority. And that's where the white supremacy comes in to bring the conversation all the way around. Because if you're in that example, that scenario that Kevin pointed out, and you don't ask yourself and you don't think it's unnatural, you're assuming on some levels that all the white people must just be the most qualified. And that's why they're here.
I want to respond to something Kevin said because, and actually, I really do. I actually do take it as some of what you said as a I don't know, compliment to me, and I generally appreciate that. I think I told you guys, and I said this on another podcast, that I always wonder why I see things differently than my sort of crowd, which tends to be mostly white evangelicals, though not all. And I think I shared with you that when I grew up, my parents were like very, very strong on pointing out about the history of discrimination against black people and letting me know all that very clearly, that how wrong and unacceptable that was. And I think I told you that's why I think I see things, I believe, a little differently than others I know do. And if I could just say one thing to illustrate this, I have a very good friend. He's a godly guy. He's been a great friend and mentor to me. But I was telling him about that, my parents on, and I said to him, what were your parents like in that way? And he said, oh, well, they weren't racist. They were just prejudiced. Okay. Now, I can say anything, but it's like, I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I'll agree with Kevin, that I think a lot of people in this country, and because of how they were, their mindset, as you said, and their own experience and their upbringing, they don't see injustice that exists. So I just want to affirm that.
Yeah. And that's the challenge that we have, is trying to help people see that without feeling a sense of blame. Like, my only sense of blame on any white person is one who wants to turn a blind eye and uphold the system, right? Like I'm not blaming you for even any benefits that you might have got from a system that's not your fault per se, but it becomes your fault when you sort of fail to acknowledge that these sort of invisible obstacles or barriers exist, and you don't try to do anything about it or even speak up and acknowledge the presence of it. And I think that if you could just get more white folks to say, like, my goal is not to make any white person feel guilty. I could care less about that. Your guilt and a nickel still won't get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I care less about the guilt. What I care about is the being proactive in trying to change these things. Like, that's what's matters is seeing these things, speaking out against it, and not siding with those who want to try to maintain unfairness and imbalance. And so I think if we can all get on that same course and just say, look, this has been wrong historically, it's wrong today. Let's figure out how we change it. And maybe DEI, I'm not going to even say that DEI is the godsend and the solution for it all. Maybe it's not the best way. It's the best way we have to date to try to address it. Doesn't mean that there aren't better ways.
Reparations will be better.
But it can't just be this. It can't just be this. This is wrong, and that's the end of the argument, which is where I think, like, a lot of conservatives who have alternative agendas want to take it there. Like, there is no, okay, DEI is bad, but we acknowledge that there's still some inequities here. No, it's sort of like inequities don't exist. Racism, they'll kind of give that ham-handed, yeah, racism exists, but I'm not racist. Okay, well, if racism exists, then exactly who is perpetuating it? The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. Well, we just saw them get out of jail scot-free. Okay, so if they're the purveyors of unfairness and inequality, and you're okay with what just happened with them, could be you part of the problem too.
I mean, we see white privilege excelling and existing all the way, going back to the political portion of all of this. Right now, Trump is showing his hand. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's targeting what he believes in a very, very racial way. And it's a problem when you have someone in a position of power that have these prejudice and racism tendencies, because now, it can be infested into a system. So when we say systemic racism, this is how it goes into it, because it becomes policy. It becomes the, defunding, which is what I feel like they're doing. They were mad about defunding the police. Now they're trying to defund DEI in every portion of the way, of just like attacking all these different programs. And now even to the respect of like not even wanting to honor Black History Month on a federal level. Like, what is that about? It's so blatant and so overt that it can't even be denied. Like a lot of ways, we always say, well, how can you really know he's racist? How can you really know but it's just in your face. And then to couple that with the people that he elevate that are unqualified, have no experience, and he not only put them in these positions, but the highest positions of power. He's crony, and the nepotism is like what we've always seen throughout the history of this country, but nobody bats an eye. Like, these people can like collapse our government agencies in such a way, and they already kind of have, and just the idea to freeze federal funding. A lot of people didn't know, like, are we going to have Meal on Wheels? Or Head Start is that going to continue? Like, you can't treat the government like a business. Like, you really can't, because too many people's lives, too many people depend on, and you can collapse people. People can be out on the street and homeless just from a very irresponsible decision, and especially when your motivation is to attack a certain population of people, or to make sure that they can be second-class citizens or whatever. And we see this, we know this, and the fight back. We need the allies of everyone, of all good people, not just us, but everyone must fight and be the resistance. We get the resistance on the other side every time we try to elevate in certain ways. But right now, good people need to resist this and fight back. Because if we normalize this, if we allow this to continue, then this will be the way. And it may not be you right now, if you're Black or but your group will be next, and I see that for a lot of people, like things that's happening with immigrants, Hispanics, like, some of us, well, it's not me, but they'll be knocking on your door next. They clearing out the jails to put you in it. Don't think for a minute, and whatever the situation, like Martin Luther King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we have to fight when we see wrong. We cannot normalize this.
Yeah, you said building jails, and I thought about the fact that, Trump has announced that he's going to sign an executive order so we can build, and by we, I mean the United States government can build a detention facility on Guantanamo Bay. And I'm like, or in Guantanamo Bay. And I'm like, there it is. It's always the money. It's always about the money. So that tells me that somebody close to Trump or one of his donors stands to make a lot of money from the prison industrial complex, right? It's with these Republicans, it's always a con game. It reminds me of the con game when it comes to school choice, Phil.
Oh,
it's the
now
same
you
thing.
guys,
These
you guys are
Republicans,
not giving me a break
I had
today.
to draw you in, bro. These Republicans always have a con game, so one of their buddies and cronies can make a lot of money. So follow the money. Follow the money. But let's move on here. I've got a clip of a congressman. He got in some hot water, and I don't want to assume what anybody thinks about anything.
Do you agree
play this
with President Trump's decision to pardon these violent people and releasing them from jail?
That's not the right one. Hold on 1 second.
If they were truly violent.
Give me 1 second. That's not the right
He
clip.
recently stepped down.
I
I like Jim Acosta.
Yeah. Jim Acosta did step down, and he issued a warning. He's like, "Hey, stand for the
Truth
truth,
to
stand
power.
on
Truth to
business."
power.
And I don't know why Jim Acosta left. Left
They
CNN.
try to take him out of
If I had
Supposedly
to,
they were
I
going to
think
give
his
him a midnight
relationship with
slot. They
Trump
were
had
demoting
something to
him
do
to a
with it.
midnight slot,
Mhm.
and that's why he left. But I
Yeah,
agree. I think what he
yeah.
said was as prescient a warning as what Biden said. Biden said something quite similar about the oligarchy that we are becoming.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Things are lining up. So we'll see what
I
happens
think
with
he,
CNN.
I think he felt to a certain degree CNN was bending the knee, kissing the ring too of Trump. That had a lot to do with it. And I think he felt like part of that was kind of banishing him to the midnight slot.
Yeah.
So
The White House is for sale.
Yeah,
he
yeah.
I'll tell you this, he probably knows a lot. He probably knows a lot about what's going on behind the scenes in CNN and some of the editorial decisions that are being made there
Mhm.
that are definitely rubbing him the wrong way. Somebody who's been in it for as long as Jim Acosta has. I mean, I think you do need to pay attention to that type of thing.
Absolutely. I've got the clip now. Check this out.
When you talk about school lunches, hey, I worked my way through high school. I don't know about you, but I worked since I was, before I was even 13 years old. I was picking berries in the fields before we had child labor laws that precluded that. I was a paper boy. And when I was in high school, I worked my entire way through. You're telling me that kids who stay at home, instead of going to work at Burger King, McDonald's during the summer, should stay at home and get their free lunch instead of going to work? I think we need to have a top-down
I think
review.
you're painting a
Think
lot
about
of these
where
kids
kids
with a
need to
broad
actually
brush.
be.
I would say that's not necessarily a fair assessment of all of the kids. So you would say all the kids in your district who use the free lunch, for example, or breakfast, they're all just sitting at home and not working. Okay, I just want to clarify because that seems like what you were trying to insinuate.
This gives us a chance. No, this gives us a chance, though, to see where is the money really being spent. Who can actually go and actually produce their own income? Who can actually go out there and do something that makes them have value and work skills for the future? I mean, how many people got their start in fast food restaurants when they were kids versus just giving a blanket rule that gives all kids lunches in high school who are capable of going out and actually getting a job and doing something that makes them have value, thinking about their future instead of thinking about how they're going to sponge out the government when
He's given all people that start in fast food, because I started in fast food. My first fast food job was McDonald's. Then I moved to White Castles. White Castle paid more and they had better perks, so I stayed there for a while. He's given all people that did that, in my opinion, a bad rap. And I'll answer his question. No, if you're going to require kids to go to school, at the very least you can pay for the lunch while they're at the school. Someone needs to tell that man that is a Rich McCormick, Republican from Georgia. I don't know what the hell is going on in Georgia, but this man sounds like he's caught up with some kind of philosophy or whatever, but it's not really consistent to what's necessary for the people. There's a lot of kids that get their primary meal at school, unfortunately, due to circumstances, not due to anything that they did. So I don't know. I mean, I guess the mean spirit Republican is back. We had compassionate conservatism. Now we got mean spirited conservatism, I guess.
They always want to balance the budget on the backs of the poor. And if they want to do anything, why don't you cut the corporate welfare? Freeze those funds for those individuals.
Yeah, tax wealth.
Because those individuals are deserving for it, because as he sort of indicates here, they work for it. Look, we know that there is a disdain for poor people in this country. That's just the reality of it. And it's a disdain politically, I think, that needs to be corrected for sure on the Republican side, and even to a better degree on the Democratic side, that poor people, and I'm talking about people who benefit from these free and reduced lunches, have no voice in either party. That's the reality of it. Bernie Sanders has tried to talk about this, and there have been a few other people who have Reverend Barber talks about this in the Poor People's Campaign, that there is a large swath of this country that falls into the poorer class and who are struggling. And these are the people that most people don't go through the day even thinking about or really kind of trying to consider. And so I think this is a slap in the face. What he said is a slap in the face to those folks. Now, look, I agree with him about the value of work. I've been working ever since I was 14 years old, and I wanted to work because as a kid, there was things that I wanted that my parents weren't going to buy for me. They weren't going to buy me the Jordans. They weren't going to buy me the starter jackets. And so they let me know that if I wanted those types of things, I was going to have to find a way to hustle and scrape up my own money. And that was the truth. But I also had two parents who were gainfully employed, and I didn't need to go on free and reduced lunches. The reality is that you have a lot of kids who are in that poverty class right now who are working. You know, they are going out. And in fact, the money that they're making, they're trying to use to support their families at home. You know, I can't tell you how many kids that I talk to on a weekly basis who are out hustling. And these kids genuinely, they see the struggle that their single mom or dad or parents are going through. And they're trying to actually work to make money to contribute to a household that's struggling. So instead of trying to figure out, you know, ways to make underage kids go to work or feel bad about getting free and reduced lunches, let's find ways to create more jobs that pay a living wage, you know, to where kids can be kids and go to school and focus on learning, and their parents have jobs that pay enough that they can support a family. Let's focus on that instead of trying to figure out how to cut money from the federal government and hurt poor people. Let's figure out ways to increase wages. Let's figure out ways to lower costs. We just published an op-ed today in the Inquirer where it talks about the state-controlled GOP has introduced 29 bills so far, but none of them have anything to do with lowering the costs of living for Ohioans, right? They rather talk about transgender and all of these other things that they want to introduce, whether or not you should be able to get, you know, what is it, the contraception where we may talk about this on the program where you can't eat without getting fined. Okay,
Coming up next.
You know, these ridiculous proposals that have nothing to do with impacting or making people's lives better.
You know what? Hold on. Put me back. I forgot I wasn't there for a second. Yeah, I agree with everything you said except for one point, right? You know, I think that from my eye, I think that one party is more in tune with the poor. But I also think we need to say that poor is different. Just like the middle class is different, you got a lot of working poor people. You got a lot of college educated people who, by all intents and purposes, are poor. They are not building wealth. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And when I look at both of the parties in their platform, one party stands out over the other party. That would be the Democrat Party stands out over the Republican Party. And it ain't even close in terms of creating policy and having conversations around kitchen table issues that will affect those people, right? That needs to be said. The two parties are not the same. Are they both perfect? No, but they are not the same when it comes to policy ideas and energy around kitchen table, issues.
I like what Janice Robertson and Anthony said here. They said, if you hear a politician only talking about making money and humanity is not discussed, run. And then Anthony says, did he have to watch his siblings while mom was working, have a good school system where he didn't have to study hard to just keep up with the work? What other home life situations was he dealing with? And those are factors too. You know, it's no consideration of like what a young person is going through, their environment and everything else. But on top of that, children need to just focus on the education. I think like even with my daughter, she did work when she was in college, but it's so much. And if you put in a whole work day and then try to do your homework and then focus on school, especially like if they're struggling in school, I wouldn't, the job is secondary, or you may have to let that go because your total focus need to be on education. And so to make that like a situation where that should be a must or even law or whatever he's proposing, that is totally wrong for children. In situations where that's possible and people do that, and a lot of people do. My daughter right now, since she was 12, she's like, when can I work? When can I work? I want to work. She want a job. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to find something that, some of these places where they'll hire at as early as 14 because she is ready and she wants to. But at the same time, if it impacts her grades, then it has to stop because the education has to be first.
T. Nicole, you say something that's very
Republicans have no soul.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nathan. I'm sorry.
I just say Republicans have no soul. They've lost their
Yeah,
soul. It's all about money. It's all about, tax breaks for the rich. It's all about DEI. I don't hear anything about people. And I've been saying it for years, and I'll say it again. The Republican Party had an opportunity, and perhaps they have an opportunity to attract voters, like black voters and people from non-traditional, like Republican voting habits. But they don't speak to the issues. It's all about some nonsense, right? And now it's all about Trump. And I think the people are the ones that don't benefit from it. Like, I would love that we had a third party. That'd be great, but that's not
yeah,
realistic at all. Third parties are a joke. Think about where is these where is Jill Stein
yeah.
right now?
But there's
Like, where are they? Where's Cornel
but
West right now?
here's the reality
Right? So the
though.
third parties are nothing more than
Yeah,
a con. So I would love that we had competition in terms of the
you,
political parties, but we
yeah, you're
just
not gonna get
don't.
it either.
And a lot of it is because the Republican Party has
Yeah,
no
you're
soul.
not going to get it either because the two party structure that we have is just too entrenched. There, it's almost
Yeah.
impossible at this point to even suggest that you could get a legitimate third party that could even compete with either of the two. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have people who are in there adding to that conversation, but I think the notion that anytime in the near future that this is going to coalesce into anything that's going to be able to challenge either of the parties, I think is probably not realistic. And Nathan, I wouldn't go so far as to label every Republican as someone without a soul. Because look, here's the reality: is
Let's go say the Republican
yeah,
Party.
okay, if we're talking about that, but there are Republican lawmakers who do support these policies, who recognize in their districts or in their constituencies that supporting these types of programs have merit. I think we got to resist the temptation to assign, some of the whack jobs on the right as well as on the left. We talk about this too, where there are some people on the left who present extreme points of view that then Republicans take and then they jump on it. I think Phil has made this point, and they use it for political purposes. So I think to suggest that this dude and what he's saying is reflective of what most Republicans in the Republican Party believe, maybe a bit of a stretch. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of them that might side with him, but I think to say that the party in and of itself is the leader of the party is soulless. I think we know that, but I think to say that there aren't others in there who don't share that point of view, I'm not willing to go so far as to say that. Last point that I would make on what you said is even within the Democratic Party, and you're right, they do speak more to the issues of the poor than the Republicans do. There's no question on that. But I even still say there's a difference between lip service and there's a difference between actual policy and action. The Democrats still serve some of the same big money interests that the Republicans do. Let's not get it twisted. Just because, and black people have said this too, Democrats have paid a lot of lip service to black folks over the years, but we have not seen the returns proportional to our support. That's just facts. That's facts. Liberals don't like to hear that, but the fact of the matter is, now Democrats have delivered a hell of a lot more than in modern times, have delivered a hell of a lot more than Republicans. Again,
And that's no argument.
No question there.
But that's no argument.
And it's often because of those independents that straddle the line, like Nathan said. I don't even believe there's an independence. You either independent Democrat or independent Republican. I think of Joe Manchin and the other lady who straddled the fence, where everybody else on the Democratic Party is voting one way, and you got one or two people who holds it up. They claim they Democrat, and then after it's all, they're not even Democrats no more. Now they're Republicans, or So we have to elect people who are fighting for our interests. But for the most part, when we're not winning, it's because we're outvoted. Like even in Ohio, Republicans have the supermajority, and it's heavily gerrymandered. So there's a lot of factors that go into why we don't have as many wins on this side as they do for the other side. But it's not to say, and I'm not saying that money isn't a factor. Money needs to get out of politics, absolutely, all the way around. But it has become a situation in Congress where the word compromise is a dirty word. Nobody wants to work together anymore, or we can't work together, or it's just like some sort of negotiation situation with these bills, and it's like nobody is being served. And that's what the American people, we should be most upset about, is that you have these politicians that, they are just levying out bills and laws and policies without any consideration. Going back to what we were saying about who should pay, or if children should work, whatever. I'm upset with the notion that congressmen have this Cadillac plan healthcare, and then they get it forever, right? Taxpayers, we shouldn't have to pay for that. For once you're out of office, it should be over. Why do we have to extend that type of benefit for them? But see, they don't know how it feels to be on this side. They're cushioned by this benefit at the taxpayers' expense, but they won't do anything to improve our healthcare system because they don't have to deal with it. And so, if they live in and feeling the impact, going back to almost full circle, what we've been talking about, when people have more empathy and understand what people are going through, then, we can progress toward change. But right now, everybody is sheltered, in their own little bubble of their reality and their world, not really wanting to see how it is on the other side, not wanting to work together. And the country is going to suffer for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I've got no problem with free lunch programs. I think that we should be having the exact opposite conversation. We be talking about how we can increase, the food services that we have for kids. In my eye, to my experience, it would be great for families. We talk about America first and Democrat first, Republican first. We need a family first party, with a priority on what is best for American families across the board, because I think that's the commonality. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, no matter what your ethnic, racial background is, you got a family, you want to protect your family. There's some commonality there. So we need to be talking about how we increase the amount of funds and services and food, quite frankly, that we can give these children, because there are a lot of kids in CPS, Cincinnati Public Schools, who are going to school hungry and coming from school hungry, right? They need a take-home box. And I know there are after-school programs that do that. There are after-school programs in Cincinnati that provide that services. But we need to realize that and fight for those things. Like, those are the kind of things that should be a priority, or one of the priorities. There's multiple priorities, I get it. But so this guy's dead wrong, and it's just like the Republican playbook. I just don't understand philosophy. I don't understand how you can hold on to a philosophy for government that's not consistent for what's best for people, right? You might have your philosophy, but if it's not consistent for what's best for the people that are paying for the government, right, then what's the point of it, right? And I take it back to Phil. I don't understand this whole school choice thing. I get the philosophy, but if the numbers don't show that that's what's best for people, what's the point of it?
Well, without getting into the whole school choice thing, which I think shows that I think it is best for people and not just for a small group. But I do want to say that I think that comment by that guy was one of the stupidest and cruelest and insensitive comments I've ever heard. He's saying that's some second grade kid and down over the Rhine or something. He doesn't get a school lunch unless he goes out and works or something, or delivers papers or whatever the hell.
Pretty much.
To me, it's
what he said.
That's a play to the base, but it's so disgusting and so stupid. I don't know how a guy like that can live with himself. One of you talked about the Democratic Party.
What does that say about the base?
What's that?
I just wonder, what does that say about the base?
What
does that say about the base?
I'll defer to Kevin's comment that sad is to say that is who we are. I mean, he convinced me on that point. It's a sad thing to accept. I do want to say that maybe I'm being deferential here to the Democratic Party, but I think there is a significant segment of the Democratic Party that does care about the poor and those kind of programs, whether it's because they have low-income people in their district or it's just part of that kind of philosophy, and I give them credit for that. I do think one thing we have to keep in mind, and this gets to any discussion we might have on all these cuts that Trump is making in the government, and I happen to think examining every dollar we spend is the right thing to do. Now, I think he probably has done it illegally, but as a rule, I think that's right, because I believe next to the threat to democracy, I think the greatest threat to our country's stability is the debt, the $36 trillion debt, which in my view is going to lead to terrible consequences, hyperinflation, or whatever in the future. But here's the counter to the thing about cutting all these programs. At the same time, people in my party are pushing and apparently going to pass these massive tax cuts. What do you think that does to the deficit? Are you kidding me? That blows a huge hole in it. That's why Bill Clinton, to his credit, balanced the budget, and then George W. just blew it apart with tax cuts. And so I happen to be a strong believer in balanced budgets, but it's not just cutting spending. It's also, if you have to raise taxes, you raise the taxes. You cannot keep living on borrowed and printed money.
Yeah. Hey, Nathan, to kind of respond to your, like, where's this guy coming from, and how can you say something like this? Like, I think what's true is that most of us speak from our experiences. And in terms of listening to him and that diatribe that he gave, I say this because I can relate to a lot of things that he said. There was a lot of commonalities in some of the things that he said to my experience. As I mentioned, I worked since I was 14. I delivered papers. I worked at rallies. Pretty much whatever he ran down was what I did as a kid. And there was value in that taught me a value for work that carries on to this day. I still, I'm somebody who's involved in like 3 or 4 different occupations and different things that I learned because I learned the value of work at a young age. Didn't impact my ability to learn, still got good grades in school, went on to go to college. The difference is that I had 2 parents, even in the midst of me doing this, I had 2 parents who were gainfully employed. So I didn't require, even though I was working, I didn't require school lunches. And none of the money that I made, my parents made me use for that purpose. It was all money that I had. And so there's sort of this recognition that everybody's experience is not the same. And there is a sense among some people, especially people who are more privileged, that if you are poor and struggling, that somehow it's your fault, that somehow it's because you're lazy and you don't want to work, which I think is a fallacy. Now, are there some people who fall into that category? Yes, absolutely. We all know some people who are allergic to a job and don't want to work. That's black, white, or whatever. That's life. But to suggest that the majority of people who are struggling economically and who need that type of support are in that position because they don't want to work or because they're lazy, I think is just a fallacy that far too many people like this congressman probably hold. And if you listen to his comments, that was what was suggested underneath his comments, that you've got these families and these kids who are on these free and reduced lunches who have an aversion to work, who are just kind of living off the government teat, so to speak. And I think that is just, again, that just goes back to the disdain for poor people that a lot of people have, in this country. And like I said, T. Nicole raised an interesting point. Like I mentor, I coach a lot of kids who are in a dropout recovery center. And a lot of these kids want to get their high school diploma, right? But they have trouble making it to school and taking their classes because why? They're working. They got jobs that they're working, that they're trying to use to support their families. And in many cases, because their families are struggling, they're telling their kids, hey, you got to go to work and get a job to even stay here because, you being in the household is a lot. It's adding to the bills, what you're eating. So we're going to need you to go out and get a job to help pay the bills that the parents can't pay. And they're working. So or are on a fixed income if they're living with grandma and grandpa. So it's like, sometimes these politicians, I think, are oblivious to how people are actually living. And, they want to talk about these things theoretically or academically without actually being on the ground, seeing how people are actually living and how these things are actually affecting them. And they're making these determinations based off of their own experience, which in many cases is very different.
That's my point. That's my point, right? You're like, what's the point of having a political philosophy for government as an elected official if it doesn't address what your constituents actually
Mhm.
need? You were generous. You said oblivious. I think they know and they just don't care. That's just me. And I think that this is on some levels just another example of the thinly veiled class warfare that we're going to see. And we've been seeing from the Republican Party, and we're going to see it even more, I fear and think, under the Trump administration. It's like, no, it's not the billionaires that are the problem. It's the poor people,
Mhm.
right? We're going to give people like Elon Musk a tax cut for his business ventures, but we want to take money from inner city school kids whose parents are coming from probably economically depressed situations because you need to work during the summer. I mean, straight up class warfare disguised as a political philosophy.
Mhm.
But that's just what I think about it. Phil had to step away for about 5 minutes. You gonna say something,
No,
TNT?
only thing I would just say is that, that's definitely the tactics of, at least one side of the party. I've always seen um, that side of being on the side of corporations and big business, and and the other side being more for families and working people, working poor, and like Kevin was saying, everyone isn't perfect, everyone isn't flawless in that action, and I think that's what a lot of voters get confused because they want to pick out certain things from certain politicians and like paint the whole party one way, what I'm saying, and voting, at least for Black people, it has always been about voting our interests. That's why we went from Republicans to Democrats. We aligned with those who serve our interests. And just like if you're
Oh,
dealing with a mate,
where's Kevin G
if
at?
you're dealing,
He'd be mad at you right
he
now.
mad at me.
He'd be mad
If,
at you right now because him and Kevin A got a whole conversation going
oh,
on
okay.
about what motivated Black people to become Democrats. And Kevin G, he's on Earth
Yeah.
too, in my opinion,
Well,
on that conversation. But go right
I'm
ahead,
just saying in
TNT.
a more simplified version without going through all the details and everything else. But a lot of Black Republicans, they like to throw in our face, and I don't know if Terrence is in the chat right there, but like, oh yeah, well when we were Republicans, and this is when we're doing it, and they don't um and couple the history and then the transition. And the only reason why, you know, majority transition over here because the policies change. It's never been about the party. And even what we're dealing with now, like this party right here seems to be more beholden to the person, to one person instead of what the country. And that was part of the part of the big thing in the election last year where there was just like, some who were like, because there was a split in their own party, in the Republican Party, where it was just like, I'm voting um, for my country and not for or to support the party because the party was not aligning with what they believed in. But all wholeheartedly, they're still conservatives, they're still Republicans, but they just could not agree with the person leading the party. But even with that, it wasn't enough, unfortunately. But people, when it comes to voting, it's all about policy. It's all about, your interests. And so where we align. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to have report cards, and for us to like really see and check and balance who is really voting for the things you care about, and if you're not doing that work on your own, it's incumbent on organizations to help show that, but people got to seek the information as well. You gotta look for it. That got to be intentional as well. And that's hard to do, the disconnect between information and education to the community for them to understand who is really working in your best interest. Is where we have to do a better job, but we got our work cut out for us. But I won't belabor the point, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let me add something, another conversation. I want to share my screen with everyone in the audience and the crew members. Check this out right here. A Mississippi lawmaker introduces Contraception Begins at Erection Act. And Phil is back. We bring him back on. Perfect timing,
Yeah,
Phil.
What do you think? What do you think? I'm some
Just
kind of
in time.
expert? No. What do you say? I'm some
Just
kind of
in
expert on this
time.
subject? Is that what you're saying?
No, I just in time as a crew member for the conversation. I meant nothing else. No
I
implication
wonder
whatsoever.
what you meant. All right.
but introduced by a Mississippi lawmaker. So let me just add this caveat before people go crazy. Like, this bill is very highly unlikely to pass, right? But if it does, it would make it unlawful for a person to discharge genetic material without the intent to fertilize an embryo. Now, the Mississippi State lawmaker, his name is Senator Branford Blackman. He's a Democrat. He introduced this about a week ago. And just let me say up front, this was meant to provoke debate. He didn't really think this was going, he said it was a little bit of satire. He's trying to make a point, which I get his point. But if it was implemented, it would impose fines of $1,000 for a first offense, $5,000 for a second offense, and $10,000 for any subsequent offenses. He's very unlikely to pass in a GOP-led legislator. But he said, look, I want to make the point, but that we have been basically putting a burden of contraception and even regulation of that, of abortion, on the backs of women. Men need to be a part of this conversation as well. Here's what I would say real quick, and I'll throw it to the crew. I think he's right. We put too much pressure. We put no onus whatsoever, should I say, on men when it comes to this conversation in terms of like policing our bodies, right? We love to police the bodies of women, but we don't do so far with men. So I think he makes a point on that. But the other thing is, I think it's also a test of people who would say that they are pro-life. Like, when does life begin? Because if life begins at ejaculation, right, then anything that prevents that would in fact be, as I've heard people call it, murder, right? So I think in every state, and I'm just saying it for the sake of conversation, I think that in the states in which abortion is legal or is illegal, then they should have the Contraception Begins at Erection Act in place on those states, because it's only fair. Why should women have to deal with their bodies being policed and not men? But I'm gonna throw it to the crew. What do you think?
Well, what I think is that if this actually became law, that every man in Congress, in fact, every man in America that is over a certain age would have more fines than they could pay. And that's just the reality. If you would want to bankrupt male America, go ahead and put this law into effect. It would be more damaging than child support is for a lot of men, alimony, and a whole lot of other things. So for that reason alone, it has no chance in hell of ever becoming a law. I'm just being real about it.
Absolutely.
Look, this is ridiculous. This is the type of stuff that I was just talking about earlier about what Republicans spend time on coming up with, as opposed to real legislation that's going to make a difference. First of all, it's unenforceable. What are you going to be doing? Hanging outside of every young man in America's bedroom, peeping to see if he got the porn video on and some toilet tissue or napkins next to him? I mean, this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Police raids. Police raids. Show us your
I mean, where as police are rounding up all of these illegal immigrants in our country, go have time to police young men and men in general ejaculating without the intention of contraception. I mean, this stuff is it defies explanation that that anybody would even introduce this and think that it would be about having some type of intelligent debate. Now, if you want to have a conversation about, again, I'm not of the mind frame that the government ought to be into policing anybody's sexual activity, men or women. And this gets down to the whole argument about, reproductive rights in this country and the role that government should have in the enforcement of that. I don't think the government should be telling men or women what to do with their bodies. I believe that's a conversation. Right. I believe that's a conversation between you and God, you and your doctor, and the good Lord is going to be the ultimate judge on what's right, wrong, or indifferent in the end. So that's something that the individual is going to have to reconcile with. I don't need the government telling me what to do or trying to be big brother. And I think that that's always the amazing thing with Republicans. They love limited government, except for when they want to try to tell people what to do sexually, whether you can be gay or hetero, whether you can be transgender or male or female, whether you can ejaculate or not. And now evidently whether you can have children or not. That is not the government's role, period.
Yeah, but I agree with you, but the government is doing it. Like in many states in our
Mhm.
country, the government is telling women what to do with their bodies, when you can have an abortion, when it will be illegal, and they are enforcing it. They are enforcing it in the state of Ohio. So that's why, and again, just for clarification, this man was not a Republican, he's a Democrat. And he admitted that it was somewhat to really largely to provoke
Mhm.
conversation. So I think there is a conversation here. Before you say it's
So,
not,
so
Kevin, there
if
is
the
a conversation.
conversation,
Right now,
if the
in our
conversation
hold on,
about
let me get it out. Right now in this country, women's bodies are policed when it comes to procreations. Men's bodies are not. Why not?
well, primarily they're not police because men are not the ones who are carrying the babies. Look, here's my thought on this: is if the goal is to punish individuals who are taking part in abortions, okay, I can understand that argument that, hey, the women, if you're saying you're going to enforce this in a community, that if you're going to punish a woman for having an abortion, that if a man is complicit in that, he should face punishment too. That's fine. That's a completely different conversation than trying to police ejaculation. So an abortion is an act, not the conception, right? So,
And so is masturbation.
no, that's what I'm saying.
Masturbation is an act.
But what is being punished is not the conception of a child, it's the termination of the pregnancy. Like that is not what's being published.
Right.
Oh, punished.
But that's
Okay, so
consistent to this
let's get away from the
conversation,
ejaculation. So it's not the creation. It's the
No. We have to stay with the ejaculation. No. I think you're looking at it wrong. So, for instance, there are some people who may look at the start of life beginning with ejaculation. I don't believe that, but there are people out there that believe.
So you're
that,
saying,
right?
see, I don't
So
even
if you
think that would
believe
stand
that
up.
life begins at ejaculation, but if you believe that life begins at
No,
ejaculation,
it doesn't.
then
It doesn't.
any act of
It
ejaculation
doesn't.
that doesn't have the intent of a pregnancy would be
It doesn't.
abortion. It would
It
be
doesn't.
murder.
Life does not begin at ejaculation. Life
Some
begins.
people believe that.
That's your opinion,
No,
though, right?
I mean, this is a scientific fact. First of all, that's just like saying
There is
that's
no
just like- that's just
scientific. There
like
is no
saying
science
a
out there that
seed-
tells us
that's
when
just
life
like
begins.
saying
But
a
go right
seed
ahead.
and a fruit is the same thing. How many times have people planted a seed and no fruit came from it? So the seed in and of itself,
That's not really the point.
seed in and of itself is not life. The seed in and of itself is not life.
But you
The
can't have life
process, so
without
if you,
the seed,
if you
though,
want to
Kevin.
talk
So
about
what's
the
your purpose?
process of life, the process of life begins when you have the successful fertilization of an egg by a sperm that begins that process of life. So
that's your opinion.
Okay, I mean, take it to the medical profession, which is who we should be listening to anyway. Okay, if you really want to get
Yeah, but we don't. We let politicians, primarily white men in Ohio, tell women what to do with their bodies because they feel like they're protecting life. And so what this brother is saying that is, hey, wait, life begins at ejaculation.
So you're saying,
if life begins at ejaculation,
so again, if that's the case,
then if men are allowed to ejaculate without the purpose of procreation, that isn't in effect.
So if that's the
abortion.
case, then you're saying every man who's ever masturbated and it hasn't resulted in a pregnancy is guilty of murder.
That's what they're saying. Basically.
I'm saying,
well, that's basically
I've already said that's not
basically
my
the
opinion.
argument, and it
I've already
and I'm
said that's
telling
not
you,
my opinion, but for the sake of the conversation, what I'm saying
it'll
is
never pass.
we should acknowledge, what I'm saying is we should acknowledge that we've put 100% of the burden on women when it comes to this conversation. What this brother is saying is, nah, men have to be held responsible as well. So I think it just comes down to, if you are a real true, you believe in lifer, then you have to agree with this policy. If you are pro-life, then you have to agree with this policy. As far-fetched as it may be in the minds of some people, it's consistent with that whole value system.
So again, the whole argument, if you are on the right, their argument is life begins at conception.
Yes.
Is that correct? So the definition of conception,
it depends. It varies.
The definition of conception. Let's explore that. Like, what is the technical?
Sperm means
egg. So
sperm
sperm in a napkin is not conception because there's no egg involved. There's no egg involved in that. So if your argument is
Right.
life
They said
begins
without
at
the intent
conception, there is no conception in masturbation.
Yeah, but listen to what TNT just said. The bill says if you ejaculate without the intent of procreation, then you're going to be
that's
See,
fine.
fine.
that's
Point.
ridiculous.
So if
See,
you're
that,
just over here
can't
having
just
I
do
don't
fun
even know
one
that
night,
that's
If you
that's
put
constitutional.
under a
cool.
I don't even know that that would be
microscope,
constitutional.
those are living organisms. They're moving around. It's living. It's life. And so that's their rationale and all of that. But there's problems and there's flaws in that rationale. But again, that's why we've had this big debate over women's bodies and what. And the whole point is like, should the government be able to govern? Of course, we feel like no, but people's argument is that they truly believe life begins at conception. Well, I had thought of one time, like, well, if that's the case, then why is it that our birthdays don't start at that date? Why does it start when we actually breathe air, we come out of the birth canal or whatnot? But it's people that believe this, and they've argued this point to the point where they have reverse long-standing landmark Supreme Court cases. And now the possibility of women being able to have control and say over their own bodies is not theirs anymore. And so I understand the dynamic of what this legislator is trying to do and spurring this conversation, as flawed as it may be in certain areas. We get what you're saying, Kevin, but it's like, given the concept and what people have been able to win in that narrative and that argument right now, that's what we're dealing with. But it's the people that are impacted are women. And we really want men to understand the impact of like how crazy this sounds,
Yeah, well, this may be an ingenious way of him. He might actually be a Roe versus Wade supporter, because to me, this is just an ingenious way of making the case for Roe versus Wade and how ridiculous it is for government to be involved in these types of things. Because if you want to say, okay, there's life in sperm, okay, well, how much in a in a single shot of sperm, let alone multiples, okay? How many life organisms are in that? And so if you got, and I hate to be, I'm having a little fun with this, and I'm gonna try to do it without. I'm gonna try to do it without being tasteless, because I do remember that I'm trying to remember that we are a family show. But in a sizable load, okay. Let's just say how many
Oh, no, you didn't.
how much life
one
is
in
in
a
that?
possible.
Yeah, how much life is in that, and then how many murder charges am I going to face for that?
Choose one.
How many murder charges am I going to face for that, or how many $10,000 fines am I going to face for that? See, this is the type of stuff that you get into that borderlines on the absurd, which again makes the case again for why government should not be in trying to regulate men or women as it relates to this particular issue. And this is why I say, like, when you get into this whole where does life begin debate, and this is why I was saying, like, if the punishment is really about the termination of what you perceive to be a baby, okay, and let's make no mistake, like, this is what the argument at its crux is, because that's what it always comes down to at the end. You're killing babies, okay? That is what the argument is. So we're talking about kind of like a formed life form, something that we would all agree is something that has the potential to become a human being.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're focusing on, is the termination, not the creation, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they're focusing in on. So
I think they're focusing on.
So okay, whatever. They've tried to parse it to make that case. They're trying to back it up as far as they possibly can. And I say, at what point does it get? So if I get a vasectomy, are vasectomies going to be outlawed now? Are tying tubes? Are we saying that women can't get their tubes tied now? This is what I'm saying. Like, this is the absurdity of the case. How far are you going to go to talk about what the prevention of life is?
It depends on the individual. Believe it or not, while I don't hold those views, there are people who believe that vasectomies are against God. There are people who do not believe in getting their tubes tied because they feel like it's against the natural order thing. They feel like it's against God and the natural way that a man and woman is supposed to operate. There are people who believe that. The problem is when those people become a lot of people and they go to Congress or they go to government and they can rewrite the laws or set the standards. That's what we got right now. And so the brother's whole point was to provoke conversations just like this. Like that's what he said in the article. Like, look, I know it's satirical. I have no expectations it's going to go anywhere, but let's just think about this. Let's have a conversation. So I thought it might be appropriate for what we've been doing. And I think there is something there.
I'm with women on this one. That
I want to know what
because men would never allow a law like this. If the point is, and I think his point is to show
that's the point,
disparity between men and women, I absolutely would say that this would never stand a chance of getting passed in any body where there are majority men. And if it did get passed, it would certainly be getting passed by a bunch of hypocrites. I just say that.
Here's the point, and I'm just saying, I put it out there. If men had children, there wouldn't be any restrictions on abortion. That's the whole point. Because they would not allow the government to come in and police their bodies. That's what he's trying to say on some levels. We can do that with women because they're second-class citizens. They just women. You're supposed to do what we say anyway, right? Follow us. And that's the whole point he's trying to make, is that it's just full of hypocrisy.
I would agree 100%.
Hey, Phil, what do you think? Sexy Phil?
Oh.
Seemed appropriate.
Well, first of all, I don't know if you can see it through the screen, but this is the first discussion we've ever had where I've turned red.
Yeah, you did. I
think it is satire, but since we've got onto the pro-life thing, I'd like to I'll make a confession first of all. When I was on city council and county commission, I was pro-life, and truly, in my heart, I was being a hypocrite because I didn't, and I don't believe that abortion, at least through the Roe, whatever that is, first trimester, I don't believe it should be a crime. And I did it purely for political reasons, because if I was told if you're a Republican and you are not pro-life, you'll never get elected. So I'll just confess that right now. Now, it's true, when I ran for Congress earlier this year as a Republican, I didn't take that position. But given that confession, I've had a gripe, and I've written a column about this with the pro-life movement, in that I think it should really be called a pro-fetus movement, because they don't really care about lives. And I'll tell you why. For example, when we had that horrible genocide in Rwanda, hundreds of thousands of people. Okay, where were the pro-life people? Where were they? Or when Bush started that war in Iraq, where ultimately 750,000 people died for no reason. Nothing. That's why I say they don't really care about born people. They care about fetuses. And I think that the way I look at this, and with all honesty, is I agree. I do believe that life begins at conception. I believe that. But just because that is the case, it doesn't mean having an abortion has to be illegal. Morally, I would consider abortion wrong. But I think the correct way to look at the issue is to weigh two balances. One is the life inside the mother, but the other is the right of privacy of the mother to her own body. And I believe, at least through the first trimester, that the privacy in this case, or right to her own body of the mother, is greater than that, no offense, little seed of life. And if we're going to take this, their point that life begins at conception, if anytime after that you're a murderer, then, correct me if I'm wrong, then some woman who uses a morning after pill, which I believe is or an IUD, both perform, in effect, abortion. So are you telling me that somebody who has a morning after pill or uses an IUD, that they're murderers? I don't buy it. I don't logically think it makes sense. So anyway, that's just my little diatribe there about the pro-life movement.
Interesting. Well, this is the point of the show when I asked if there's anything that we missed, or was there a point that you forgot to make? Did somebody say something you're like, you know what, I'm going to let them have it, or at least give them some pushback, or maybe there was a point you wanted to make that you didn't get a chance to? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I'll just say,
Nobody? I want to make something up just
I'll
because.
just say this. I got on my T-shirt, my Maya Angelou's, and I love this poem, "Still I Rise." And it's a part in the poem where it talks about the slave being the hope and the dreams of the slaves. And when I think about that, um, the life that I live today was something that was only in their dreams. And that was like profound and powerful. I will hear that poem all the time, and it kind of just, you know, run past it. But one time I really just like dived into it, and then to think about it, my ancestors couldn't even imagine the life that I get to live today. And so I pay homage to them, honor to them. We are embarking on Black History Month. And no matter what this government decides to do on whatever capacity, make it a time to really educate it and inform your family about the history, the Black history, which is a powerful history in this country. Our story is a powerful story, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. If anything, it's the greatest story of adversity that's ever told. And so we got to continue to tell our story, no matter if they try to ban books and everything else. We have to educate our families, and along that, anybody that cares to listen and will be open to the truth and not a recreated version of what this story, our story, is in America.
All right. Anything else?
Well said. I think just to piggyback on that, as again, you know, a lot of things it seems like are under attack, you know, right now, particularly as it relates to minorities, Black people in particular. And as we celebrate Black History Month this month, you know, let us all be cognizant of the fact that there are those who are trying to roll back, rewrite history, as Nicole said, and we have to resist that with everything that we possibly can. But I would just simply say also, you know, let's just not be content to review our history and learn from our history, but we are in an era where we need to be making history. That the history that our ancestors will read about at some point in the future is being made today. You know, we only see it as the present and how we live in the present today. But I'm always reminding people, you know, how do you want to be viewed in the annals of history, you know, 50 years from now? You know, do you want to be viewed as someone who had an impact, who made a difference, or somebody who stood on the sideline and watched while it happened? So I think, you know, we remember those in history who impacted history and who made history. And so I think the challenge before all of us, as we review our history and those who impacted and allowed us to be where we are today, the question that each of us should ask is what is going to be our imprint, what is going to be our footprint on the history of our ancestors, and how will they talk about us 50 to 100 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know my motto is, as Nate the Barbarian, I'm going out swinging, taking as many with me as I can, period.
Mm-hmm.
But listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation. And then I keep thinking about Kevin G. I know he's going through something with his family. My heart goes out to him. I hope they're going to receive good news today. I think his wife is dealing with some health issues. So thoughts and prayers with him. Hopefully he can get back with us soon. But more importantly, hopefully his wife and his family are in good health. And if they're not, just sending him some positive vibes and looking at asking the man above to look over his family. But listen, have a great rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. We're planning to be back on Tuesday again with more debate and discussion. And thank you so much for being here. We'll talk with you soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.